Good afternoon or good morning, everyone, depending upon where you are dialing in from today. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's going to be an informative hour plus of conversation. First, I'd like to introduce myself very briefly. I'm Karen Lewis. I am the Director of Institutional Greening at Hazone, and I'm joined by many wonderful people here today. I'll tell you more about that shortly. First, what I'd like to do is, of course, run through some tech things, as we've all gotten very used to doing the past 20 months. Now, note that while you can't see everyone's questions, please use the panel, the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen to ask questions throughout this session. I encourage you to reach out to any of us with respect to questions you might have. You can direct it at one particular person, to all of us, and I, along with the assistance of others behind the scenes, will get to as many of your questions as possible. Now, the title of our session today is Navigating Local Resources and Connections to Take Action. I'm sure you're all interested in learning how we can take governmental policies that are happening at the federal level or even at the state level and translate into something that we can move forward with as a roadmap. But how do we do that? Now, why am I leading the session? Well, because I have a vested interest, because of my role at Hazone, with many of the greening initiatives that we do, including the Hazone Seal of Sustainability. Our many seal sites regularly ask how to find local resources who can help them to understand legislation and find ways to implement programs tied to energy efficiency, renewable energy, and many other climate mitigation strategies. They just don't know how to make that translation happen into a roadmap. Now, one of the challenges that comes from living in a country where we have federal, state, and even more local legislation is that there's no uniform organizing structure to assist with implementation. Where do you turn to find out how, where, and with whom you should work with to understand legislation and find those local resources? For example, there are state policies associated with solar panels and tax incentives, but how do you actually take advantage of that? Who do you reach out to learn more? And who are the companies that you should really trust to help you put those solar panels on your roof? What we want you to do and get out of this session is learn what those organizations, who those organizations are, what they can do for you, and what questions to ask of those people. Now, you'll learn from our panelists that resources can be defined in very different ways. Is it an association? It is a government organization. Is it your interfaith community? What about your local Jewish Federation and other associated organizations? There are many different ways to define resources, and we're going to unpack all of that in our time together today. Together, we will delve into these questions and more. And I also want to point out that we are gathering suggested resources from these panelists, and we'll be sharing them out with you at the end of this session, so stay tuned for that link. We appreciate you being here with us today. Now, rather than introduce all of these speakers that we have with us today, I've asked each of our panelists to give their own bio, or I guess it's their autobiography, and describe the organization they work with, specifically as it relates to this topic, taking policy and operationalizing it. I have no doubt that these well-informed, experienced panelists will share many nuggets of knowledge that will make it easier for the practitioners on this webinar to explore and implement sustainable programs and take on other greening initiatives. Without further ado, let's get started and see what together we can learn. First, Dr. Lorna Gold.
Thanks, Karen. I'm so delighted to be here with you today. I'm Lorna. I'm based in Ireland, so I think I'm the only international panelist on our panel today. It's a real joy to bring this international perspective into our discussions. I work as the Director of Movement Building with quite a small organisation called Faith Invest, which started in 2019. And our core focus is all about mobilising faith communities to recognise the urgency of taking ecological action and supporting faith communities to play a more full part as key stakeholders in the future of our planet. And we do this in two key ways. Firstly, we engage faith and mobilise faith leadership to see what more each faith can do from their perspective based on their teachings to act for climate and ecological justice. And we have a major programme which I lead called Faith Plans for People and Planet, which Hazon is a partner of, and I'll say a bit more about that later on. The second way that Faith Invest helps is by providing faith institutions with guidance on how faiths can use their own financial resources, specifically their investments, to serve wider purposes of sustainability. This two-pronged approach was given a significant boost last autumn on the 4th of October when there was a multi-faith statement issued at the Vatican ahead of COP26, which committed many faiths to produce bold plans and align their assets for climate justice. It really was a major step ahead, which gives a huge platform for all different faith communities to call on their leadership to implement climate justice. On a personal level, I have to say that my biggest motivation in climate justice, besides my Catholic faith, is also my role as a parent. I've been working in climate justice issues for 20 or more years, and it was only when I have had my own children that I recognised the urgency of this crisis and the disconnect with my own life, my faith community, and society at large. It led me to write down my own story called Climate Generation: Awakening to Our Children's Future, partly as a way of processing my own understanding of what was happening to our world, but also as a no-nonsense guide for parents and grandparents and anyone else who loves children on what we can do together to safeguard our children's future. So I'm delighted to be here to have this conversation with you today, and I'm going to hand on now to Sue Salinger from Ecar Farm.
Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Lorna. Great to meet you and hear from you, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about your work and how we can utilize that here in Colorado. I'm the executive director of Ecar Farm. We are a earth-based, faith-based organization that creates programming for about 6,000 people a year on a piece of land in the middle of the suburbs. We grow food to distribute through food access partners to work on both food and environmental justice issues. And we are we run a program that is a Hazon program called the Seal of Sustainability that I'm sure we'll talk more about, where we organize Jewish institutions, congregations and organizations to really take on institutional change. And we do that by connecting them together and connecting them to local resources so that they can make change as an institution and so that membership and constituents can find a way to plug into this issue that's getting more important for everyone. As you probably know, last week we had a massive wildfire. It was a firestorm that took out over 1,000 homes in a suburban area. And we anticipate that these issues are just these kind of events are just going to continue to happen. And we have a real role to play as faith-based community in in every way. I like to think about it as really full spectrum networking to address climate issues. There are, in the Seal of Sustainability, we've got 13 organizations right now. It will have 25 by the end of the month. We really know that that represents 80,000 Jewish people, and that is a strong leverage point for all areas of climate change. On a personal level, I'll let you know that I worked for Hazon in Detroit as the founding managing director of the Detroit region, where we developed the Seal of Sustainability program for 40 organizations and really put climate change on the Jewish radar. What I did before that was work as director of lifelong learning for several congregations where we focused on earth-based and environmental issues. And prior to that, I worked for a long time in media doing national and international environmental change production and storytelling. The time is now for us. I'm really looking forward to hearing from the rest of the panelists. I want to introduce you to our next panelist, Sarah Moskowitz, the Deputy Director of the Citizens Utility Board.
Thank you, Sue. Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Moskowitz again, Deputy Director at the Citizens Utility Board, otherwise known as CUB, here in Illinois. A little background about our organization. CUB is an unusual group because we were actually created by an act of the Illinois General Assembly, but we are not affiliated with Illinois state government. We basically arose out of a lot of discontent in the early 80s around soaring electric rates. So we were created by statute to represent the interests of utility ratepayers, specifically residential and small business customers of the regulated utilities here in the state of Illinois. I really wish we were national, because then I could just tell everybody to call us if they have questions about their local incentives to go solar or to invest in energy efficiency. But unfortunately, we're just an Illinois organization, but we do a lot of regional work. We're tapped into networks of consumer advocacy groups that are also working in the sustainable energy arena. So we are also, there are other consumer advocacy groups akin to ours in other parts of the country. However, I think CUB is a little unique in that we have capacity to really work with individual consumers hands-on. We have a hotline that people can call. In fact, my first job at CUB almost 22 years ago was one of the people answering the phone at the organization. And I'm proud of what we do, because we're really where the rubber hits the road on a lot of these policies. Although we weren't created to be an environmentalist organization, consumer interests track very closely with environmental interests. Clean energy is affordable energy. When you think about things like energy efficiency, of course, that's going to save people money. We talk about good solar policies that make it easier for people to offset their energy use in their homes. Of course, that's going to be good for consumers. So we approach all of these same issues and really look at practical ways to implement policies that that benefit consumers and allow them to tap into the growing clean energy economy. I don't know if anybody on today is an Illinois resident. If you are, I hope you are as excited about the passage of the Clean Energy Jobs Act as we are. Now we're getting into the details of how some of these great new programs are going to play out on the road. How are we going to operationalize these great big ideas, as Karen put it? So I'm really excited to be here. I could talk about this stuff for hours and hours, but I know that we're limited on time. So I will pass it off to Rebecca from a great organization, North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center. Take it away, Rebecca.
All right, hi all, I'm Rebecca Delamora. I'm a policy analyst at the North Carolina Clean Energy Technology Center, which is part of NC State University. So we are a land grant program. So essentially we have to provide outreach and knowledge dissemination to the state of North Carolina. But along with that, of course, we provide information to the entirety of the United States. So within the center, we have essentially four main groups. So we have our industry and energy efficiency group, our transportation group, our policy group, which is what I work with, and our training group. So I'll be focusing mainly on the policy group today, because that is where we have the most amount of resources for the general public. So within our program, and what I work on the most is something called Desire, the database for state incentives for renewables and efficiency. So it is, as the tin says, essentially a giant online database, and the link will be in the PDF that Libel will send later. The database has a list of almost every single incentive and policy that the state or the federal government has related to renewable energy or energy efficiency. So this includes things like tax credits, energy storage targets, anything you can think of, it's probably in the database. So we cover all types of programs, all types of technologies, all types of people who are eligible for the program, including individuals, nonprofits, or religious organizations. And along with that, we also provide technical assistance to governments and businesses. So if a government or business wants to, create a new program or improve their energy efficiency, they can come to us and say, we want to know what are examples of other types of programs and policies in different states and areas, and we can provide that for them. I also have experience in the public sector itself, as I did an internship at the Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection this past summer. So I learned a lot about what governments can do and how they do it in order to get these programs implemented, and all of the work that goes in behind it. So I'll mainly be talking about Desire. We have plenty of other resources that I can also offer that I've also put into the links that will be sent out later. So anything I mention will most likely be within the list. And if I don't, that probably means I just thought of it just now. So thank you so much. I'm going to hand it back to Karen so we can get started.
Thank you, Rebecca. And just to clarify, that database, Desire, that's for all the 50 states, correct?
Yeah, it's all
Great.
50 states plus federal government plus territories.
Wonderful. So in other words, my guess is that 99.9% of the people on this discussion right now can go to Desire, and you're going to find something out about what's available in your state and the policies and legislation that's happening there right now, which is an amazing resource.
Absolutely.
And I do know, for example, that Sarah Moskowitz uses Desire all the time. So it really is a well-known resource. And if it is not known to you now, I hope it will be in the future, and I'll be able to tap into that. So the people that you've heard from already that have introduced themselves, these wonderful women, and the organizations they represent have a lot of tools available for all of us as a roadmap to help us figure out how to get there, whom to talk with, what to consider, what to avoid, and how perhaps you might be able to pay for it. And what I want to do is start this conversation with some questions that are either for a particular person on the panel or maybe for all of them. And I encourage all of my panelists to feel free to ask questions of each other. It's like a round robin conversation. And if we could all have a cup of coffee with us while we were doing this and share some cookies, that would be great. We'll have to do that later on. Having said that, I encourage our audience to remember to use the Q&A function so you can feel like you're part of the conversation as well. So the first question I'm going to ask, and anyone can answer this, or all of you, for each of you, what are your best practices for making connections and finding resources? What works for you or for the people who reach out to you? In fact, when I ask examples about this from you earlier, when we had a conversation, we were planning this panel, some of you spoke about databases, some of you spoke about community, some of you spoke about a particular organization or type of organization to turn to. Could you please respond by how you define resource and then give an example or two? And how about if we start with Sarah?
Sure. Thanks, Karen. Yeah, I think there are different kinds of resources. Sometimes all folks need is a phone number and a website. I'm interested in sealing up my home or my business, and I want to find out if there's any energy efficiency incentives in my area. If you're in the United States, I would direct you to first just your utility. A lot of states have requirements on their utilities that dictate they need to encourage their customers to use less. And so a lot of times the utilities themselves will run those kinds of programs. So a lot of times all you need is just some info. Other times, maybe you need a little bit more hands-on help, maybe an organization or an entity to shepherd you through the process, especially if it's a little bit more complicated, a heavier lift for you or your organization, in which case you may, if you're in Illinois, CUB would be a great resource for that. Another resource, I think, for getting help if you're having an issue or you have a more complicated issue going on, would be to reach out to an elected official's office. And I think that may not be something that's immediately on folks' radars, but I have found that can be quite effective. If I at my organization get a call from a state senator or a state representative or one of their staff, I hop to it. And I know that other folks hop to it. And so that can be a really good way to, first of all, people in these offices often know a lot because they've been asked about these issues before. And if they don't, they have good contacts at other places who can try and track down the answers for them. Meanwhile, if you do contact a legislator's office for some constituent help with one of these kinds of programs, that also indicates an interest and a demand for these kinds of programs. And that can never hurt when you are talking about policies that often can really grow and shine at the local and state level.
Thank you, Sarah. Sue. Oh, you're on mute, Sue.
Yeah, sorry, it took a while to find sorry about that. The way I think about this resources these days is that I think about them on several levels. We have individual resources. We have our own heart and our own wisdom tradition that really inspire us and that power us and that fuel us. We have a morally active faith tradition and wisdom tradition that says we are responsible to the earth. So that's a big resource. We love our children and grandchildren and community members. And so that is a resource not to forget about. You know, the mental health issues of climate change are tremendous. And the more we can build our own resources through either Jewish ritual and practice or meditation and contemplation, those resources are important. Whatever can keep you from falling into despair and apathy, because you can't be in that place in order for you to do the next level of change, which is institutional change. So I think there's institutional resources. We're on a call today for Jewish institutional change. So the institutions and the schools and the social organizations that you're part of, all are networks and all have resources. You've got the members that have their own resources that they can bring to bear, whether it's education or knowledge or contacts or cash or time. At an institutional level, we also have institutional networks. Every synagogue is part of, the rabbis are part of a rabbi board. The programmers are part of a programming board. The educators are part of national and local education boards. All of these are areas of resource and areas in which we can make change. On a local level, I'd suggest anyone working on a green team or a social justice committee at a congregation to plug into the local JCRCs, the Community Relation Council. That's the organized Jewish body in every place that is working on legislation. And in many places, the environment is not on the agenda of the JCRC, or it's just beginning to. So as an individual or an institutional rep, you can influence that change. All the JCRCs have people working on local legislation who are either lobbyists or information gatherers who put together what is the slate that's coming up and how do you plug into that. So Jewishly, institutionally, there's a way to do that. And then on the larger level, there's national organizations working on helping us make change locally. So Chazon, Dayenu, you know, some national groups work on legislation, national and local, and some work on other kinds of tactics. We're only going to make massive change and only address this as institutions meaningfully if we do this together. So massive connection to networks, I think, is so important. The other resources are the non-Jewish resources. We plug into every legislative group, 350, any other group working on climate change. And we also work with the interfaith organizations. We try to show up and participate at interfaith organizational meetings. So there's a wealth of human resources and network resources.
Maybe I could come in there. So you kind of sparked lots of things from what you were saying there. Also, when you introduced yourself, you already sparked something in me when you used the word full spectrum networking, because I think sometimes we kind of jump to solutions before we've kind of almost internalized what the problem or what the issue really is that we're talking about here. I think we can identify, obviously there are practical, concrete things that need to be done to reduce our carbon emissions, to decarbonize, and that's a really, really important thing when it comes to like institutions, infrastructure, buildings, and that's absolutely key. But as you just said, like the faith communities, I work across all the faiths, have something really distinctive and unique to bring to this discussion. And I think it's something that is increasingly being called on to kind of really step up to the plate. to address our own responsibility in tackling this really urgent crisis. And one of the things that I guess what we try to do with Faith Invest in terms of resourcing and helping people is to think not just about what we have to kind of reduce and stop doing, because like obviously we need to the climate crisis is often articulated in a kind of, you need to stop doing this and you need to stop doing that and you need to reduce your emissions and you need to, and we can lose sight of what we need to be doing more of and what we need to be kind of really stepping into. So as faiths, for example, we do pilgrimages. We need to be looking at how we bring ecological meaning to those pilgrimages that different faiths do. We run retreats, and how do we bring the ecology message into the heart of our retreats? We have big faith celebrations. We engage thousands and millions of people in celebrating. How do we make those celebrations more meaningful and different in an ecologically challenged crisis, a world facing what we're facing today? Similarly, like we all have media channels. How are we? So it's this question that is so well put, even in that movie I watched the other night, Don't Look Up. It's a satire of the kind of deafness of our world to the crisis. I think faiths, first and foremost, have all that wisdom, all those resources to try to help people to hear again, to kind of open the ears, and to do that through all the, I like to call it full spectrum planning and full spectrum thinking. So you're thinking not just about what you have to stop doing, but what about how we as faiths can engage more in making our faiths more meaningful in this message of ecological justice, integral ecology, central to everything that we do. And I think there's a lot to be gained by mutual sharing and learning across different faiths on this front. It's something we all share together, and can be really fun as well, learning about how the Buddhists in Cambodia are ordaining trees to save them from being destroyed, or how the Christian communities have created this new season of creation to lift up the liturgies. So yeah, I think there's a lot we can learn from each other.
Thank you, Lorna. Thank you for sharing that thoughtful interfaith perspective. I do want to share a little more about the seal of sustainability, as I have another question to ask that was posed by a couple of our audience members as well. So the seal of sustainability is an institutional greening program designed by Hazon in the mid-2010s that's designed to help any Jewish organization, a congregation, a JCC, a Hillel, think about ways in which they can institutionalize greening within their organization. And it can be anything from thinking about composting and food waste and food choices to really considering what your options are with respect to renewable energy. And we operate on a national basis. So we have seal sites at various different locations throughout the country. And we engage with them in a variety of different ways, through webinars, through an online portal, through community building, as Sue was talking about earlier, with respect to really getting that community sharing and turning to each other for networking, that full spectrum networking. Now, one of the things that happens within our SEAL community is we will have someone come to us, this is a scenario, and they'll say, this happened just a couple of months ago. They had a donor come to them and offer up seed money to start putting solar panels on their roof. And this organization didn't know what they needed to do first, who they should talk to in their local community to find out about the questions to ask of potential vendors, even to find out which vendors to ask to submit a proposal. They didn't know what kind of tax incentives were available for them and how they should best take advantage of that and structure this relationship. So the question I have, and I pose for all of you, but maybe Rebecca and Sarah, you could take initial stab at this, is how would you respond to them? How would you guide them? What would you suggest they do to get started down operationalizing that and taking advantage of this generosity, of this money that's been offered to them?
So for us, at least, I would say logically, if someone would, come into Desire, see, an incentive that they want to find more information about, and probably either email us, or normally we try and have contact information. So the person literally in charge of the program at the state government, we should have their information on the entry. So that way, if we can't answer their questions, hopefully the person who actually works on the program can. I would also highly recommend, because Sarah brought this up a little bit, state governments or legislators, I'd also recommend not just elected officials, but general government bureaucrats. So people who work at state energy offices, or especially if your city has it, a local office of sustainability, because offices of sustainability are becoming much more popular around the country and around the world, because it allows cities who have much more power than a lot of people think to be able to implement policies and programs related to climate and energy. So those people have a lot of information and will be very happy to help you with any questions you have. And they would also probably have information on state issues as well.
Thank you, Rebecca. Sarah, do you have anything to add to that with respect to how to get that started?
That's exactly what I would likely recommend. If you are interested in shopping around for maybe a contractor or installer, there are, depending on what state you are, there are state industry associations that have members. So, your state solar energy association could have a searchable, a lot of times we'll have a searchable list. CUB always recommends getting at least 2, preferably at least 3 different quotes from folks to do the work. There have been studies done that find that people who get more quotes save more money ultimately when they do the install. Some states even have their, for example, in Illinois, our Public Utility Commission has maintains a list of approved vendors for these programs. So finding out if there are any kind of state, or sometimes the utility will run a program to kind of grant approval for certain vendors to run these programs. So look into whether there are any kind of lists like that, because that's a really common question that we get, is who do we hire to do this work? Where do I even start? And that can vary a lot from state to state. And just to be clear, anybody who's on this call, you're welcome to reach out to me, even if you're not in Illinois, and I can try and hook you up to resources in your individual state, because I know things do differ a lot state to state. But I think Rebecca's ideas were a really good place to start for sure.
And I absolutely agree with you on having, contract databases. I added a few national industry associations into the links, because I didn't have enough to put, all 50. And I also added one private company called Energy Sage. So Energy Sage, they have it. Yeah, exactly. They have a database of solar installers across the country, and they will also provide you with multiple quotes for your solar installation. And we work with them. So they work with us to help maintain the desired database, like on a IT level. So I can verify that they are very trustworthy, and you can definitely rely on the contractors and the quotes that they give you.
I want to say that, thank you. I wrote down Energy Sage, but I forgot to say it. Energy Sage, their website is so nice, it's almost suspect, but they are actually like a legit consumer friendly. We use them a lot, even internally at CUB.
I don't know about anyone else who's on this conversation right now, but I'm writing down this list. Like my shopping list, for example, is getting longer and longer, and I really appreciate all that you're sharing. And I know that we do have so many other resources that you've already shared in advance that we'll be able to share out later on. I'm looking at a question that is like the addendum to this one. So I want to thank the people who are posting questions. It's quite helpful to see what is of concern to you. So I'll just read this one. Many of the existing programs are suitable for organizations and/or individuals who have financial and other resources to take advantage of sustainability programs. How do you recommend they navigate programs where they don't necessarily sit in the driver's seat. For example, a renter who can't make decisions on whether or not their building is sustainable, or communities who might not be able to decide where their energy is sourced from. What do you recommend these organizations do? And I don't know, Sue, if you've been working with organizations in Colorado or you did in Detroit that faced these challenges, and if anyone else can speak to that as well.
There's yeah, it's different in every place. Every place has its different concerns. So, for example, in Michigan, there was there's a tremendous concern about basements flooding and water. The Detroit metro area, this is just as a real life example. Detroit metro area had, was a swamp and could only be developed when there could be water drainage. And with the increased rain that's coming out now, there's quite a lot of trouble. So there's a lot of state and national money that's now coming available to work on large scale environmental solutions. And so but they're too big for an individual or one institution to go for. So if it's $1 million minimum national resources grant, what we found helpful was to collaborate with a couple of institutions that had enough space to be able to meet the requirements for that grant, pool our resources together to split up the fundraising responsibility, meet with the program officer, and then utilize the funders and states list of approved vendors that we went through one by one for those grants, and then network in our community. But that was for a grant that replaced parking lots at the participating institutions to make permeable paving, which is important in that area of the country, to revive waterways and build natural berms to be able to keep water away from people. So again, in order for an individual to get those answers, I think collaborating up with other groups and spreading the load of research around is really important.
Karen, if I could just add to that a little bit, I'm really glad that this person raised that question, because this is something that concerns CUB a lot. Again, with a focus on consumer advocacy, a lot of what we spend our time doing is kind of trying to overcome this myth that clean energy is just for rich people. You have to be the kind of person who can afford a single passenger vehicle or Tesla, or afford to put solar panels right on your own roof. And what about those of us who live in apartments or who don't have cars and all these things? And they're to a great extent that it's not true. But a lot of that depends, again, on your local policies. A large coalition of organizations have worked really hard in states around the Midwest to try to make sure that equitable decarbonization policies have been passed in their local general assemblies. So, for example, in Illinois, a few years ago, we passed a bill that created a community solar program. So people can subscribe to a share of a community solar garden somewhere in their utility territory, and they can actually see the economic benefits of that subscription directly on their local electric bill, even if they don't have the panels on their own property. And so that's great for me. I live in an apartment, or people who rent, etc. There's also Solar for All program came out of that same bill, which is basically, it's an income qualified rooftop solar program. No money down solar on folks' homes who meet certain income qualifications. There's a real problem right now, not enough people know about this. It sounds too good to be true. Programs right now, there's a lot of talk about implementing programs around the electrification of transportation, making sure, again, that the money just doesn't just go to folks who are thinking about purchasing an electric vehicle, but actually gets shunted to public transit or to fleets to really kind of to achieve optimal decarbonization of our air. Throughout there's a national program called Energy Efficiency for All, which focuses on multifamily building efficiency policies. I think every state has, it's called EFA, Energy Efficiency for All. Every state, I think, has an EFA branch of groups working to implement policies that bring these benefits to folks who rent or own in multifamily buildings. The Midwest Building Decarbonization Coalition. This is a big talk about, we haven't even talked about yet, moving us away from burning fossil fuels right in our own homes to create heat or to heat our water. Here in Illinois, most of us burn a fossil fuel on the property to heat in the cold winters, right? But that obviously is not a sustainable situation. So how, as we are cleaning up our electric generation, how do we transition our properties to electric space heating and water heating? That sounds like a really expensive proposition. So there's a lot of talk right now about how to do that equitably in a way that benefits all. So that's it. That question really points to one of the primary issues that I'm seeing all over the country when I go to conferences and I talk to people about, the future of the clean energy transition, what's happening now, doing it equitably in a way that benefits all, especially coming off of, the social movements that have gotten underway after like the pandemic started. We saw like massive protests in the streets about making sure that the needs of oft neglected populations in our country are better met. I think that's coming together really well with attention on the climate crisis to make sure that the solutions aren't just for the few.
And there are a lot of government and utility programs are now including specific low income or social justice carve outs in their program. So a portion of the program has to be dedicated to low income or social justice development. So that way, people like that can get a chance to actually move forward with that. And I included some specific low income national programs in the link, specifically the Weatherization Assistance Program and the Low Income Home Energy Assistance Program. So those provide low-income people with the ability to weatherize and include energy efficiency in their homes. And then Sarah, you brought up, heating your house. And I'm like, I can never talk enough about heat pumps because no one knows a lot about heat pumps. And heat pumps are essentially a heat pump. What it does is it takes the air outside of the house, so like in the atmosphere or underground, and then the air inside your home and trades it, but it moves the heat or the cold with it. So you can use a heat pump to both heat your home in the summer and cool your home in the winter, and it runs entirely on electricity. But it's not people don't know about it as much as solar panels. So I think it's really important that people know that there's actually a way to not only, decarbonize your electricity, but decarbonize your thermostat. And there are programs, out there to help people, afford them, including in, general government programs or in, local programs like solarize or thermalize programs.
Rebecca,
Sorry, I just read a few pumps.
Rebecca, I'm so glad you mentioned the justice issue. What congregations and institutions have is land, and they have water access. And so what we've been doing with trying to change out landscaping and growing food and putting gardens in is a help for it is really also a response to climate change. Your landscaping around your largest asset. I mean, many synagogues have acres and acres and acres of grass that they're irrigating, that they're pesticiding, and they're smack in the middle of communities that need resources. So I think a really beautiful thing to think about, one thing that Ecar is doing is supporting with technical assistance and funding. We write group grants for our participating organizations. We're putting in food gardens so that the school and the congregation can utilize it as a laboratory, as a classroom, as a place for celebrations. The food itself gets distributed and used in the congregations. Excess goes to the community. But making space available for community to come garden, there's so much we can do to reach out to the larger community as a faith-based community and provide resources. If COVID, in as much as COVID is a climate emergency, what we've seen during COVID is a rise in hunger, of hundreds of percentage points. One in three families in Denver is now food insecure, meaning they don't know where their food's coming from. If we can utilize our space to grow food, to cool the area, to become cooling centers, to be water suppliers when people need water, there's so much we can do. When we're writing grants, because we're working with the highly impacted communities and we're bridging that gap of difference from the Jewish community, which generally speaking isn't experiencing or has enough money to evade climate to some degree, climate chaos to some degree, not in the case of this last fire. But really our space can be used to grow food, and that social justice work can help meet those grant requirements for those other projects.
You all are speaking right now to the richness of what resources are and how we can use each other and other assets that we have as resources, in addition to thinking about this richness of resources that are available with thinking about elected officials, and not only that we're asking them to pass a bill, but also for their network, for their connections and things like that, for learning about associations and how they can be of assistance to us. And so you just mentioned the assets that a lot of Jewish institutions have, and that's a building or that's land. And I was thinking about something Lorna said earlier about talking about assets and really thinking about our assets, and wanted to explore that a little bit more. Lorna, your work is tied to motivating and enabling how faith groups think about themselves as agents of change. And you mentioned thinking about your assets and how assets can be agents of change. Can you elaborate on that? And if anyone else wants to speak about that as well, about thinking about how we use our assets as a local resource.
Yeah, thanks, Karen. Faith communities, I mean, the last estimate was that faith communities own or control 8% of the Earth's landmass. That's in terms, if you take the assets of faiths together. Faiths constitute the most organized, diverse global constituency out with the state structure, bigger than any corporate when considered together. That, I think the work of Faith Invest has really been about helping faiths to recognise that we have such huge assets in and of ourselves, that if we mobilise our own communities, as you said rightly, Sue, to start to look afresh at how we use our land, how we use our buildings, what we can do more. Yes, we need to be looking at what help is available out there. I really recognise that. We need to look at what the policy environment is and those resources that can help us get there. But the bigger question I always feel is mobilising and motivating our leadership, whether that's Jewish leadership, whether it's the Vatican in my case often, whether it's the churches, the imams, to think differently about how we mobilise our own assets. I mean, it sounds something fairly kind of almost logical or kind of no-brainer, but you would be very surprised at how little thought is currently going into how those assets can contribute to solving the climate crisis. So the examples that you gave, Sue, around the use of the land around synagogues can be used for community gardens, for starting to address the food crisis, can also be used to rewild the whole question of pollinators. Where faith communities have something really significant to add is that we're dispersed communities at a local level. Can you imagine the creativity? One project that's happening in Ireland is starting to create bee corridors, pollinator corridors, where people of different faith communities say, well, I could offer my back garden, your back garden, our back garden, around the churchyard. Like, if you can start to create a map of our local communities and then start with who we are and motivated by faith to start to restore those local communities for around care for the earth. So that's the kind of approach that we're bringing, and we see that there is such a huge energy to do this, to look first at what our communities and our land can be used for, and where possible to do it in a multi-faith context as well. It really helps in terms of generating greater value and greater kind of energy around the issue.
Lorna, one project we're doing that speaks to that, I'm so glad to hear from you. We're putting in orchards. So we have a fruit tree initiative where every year we put in 2 or 3 trees at every participating organization. And this is the 3rd year of it now. We're gonna have fruit forever. It's lovely.
That's amazing. And I mean, I saw in your little answer to somebody's question there that why does this really matter? Like that it's faith communities and how you frame the kind of question. You were talking about the Holocaust Memorial Garden. It's really powerful. These spaces become really powerful for people in terms of reconnecting their deepest selves to the earth. There's such a yearning in people to, and we know from all the psychological studies that have been done, that it's our sense of disconnect, the sense of disconnect that we have with the environment that's the very root of the problems we're facing. Faiths can start to work together to heal that. And sometimes it's simpler. There are very simple solutions. There's the very complex ones we've been just talking about in terms of engaging utility providers and retrofitting and clean energy. But there's actually quite simple things which are about how we shift curriculums perhaps in our schools to engage our children in more active connection with the environment. There's how we use our land, engaging our congregations in very simple rethinking about our own. So many of us have gardens, and many of them are green deserts, where we even use herbicides and all sorts of things to kill off so that it looks somehow tidy. We need to start to rethink all of that, and our faith can also help us to do that in just starting simply to do that in terms of tree planting and looking at where the local resources are around some of these rewilding tree planting initiatives as well.
Lorna, you raise a very good point. We've been focusing a lot, and rightly and understandably so, on decarbonization and energy efficiency. And in fact, we have legislation right now at the federal level, as well as a lot of different states that's addressing that right now. But we also can think about our natural environment and ways in which we can turn to nature to help us solve problems. Sue, you've been at your Ecar Farm doing a lot of wonderful things and you've been talking about food and sustainability and food insecurity. Can you broadly speak to networks that people can tap into in other places in the United States or North America, where they might be able to get some resources and assistance on finding ways to start a community garden, to do native planting? Like, what are the associations you would list or other organizations that come to mind?
Anyone interested, feel free to reach out to me, Sue at ecarfarm.org for specifics. But there are many small and medium-sized grants available. They come up like every 3 months. They're funded over and over again. So there's small-scale cash available to nearly anybody to be able to get school gardens if your congregation has a school, if you're working with youth, if you're in an area that is close to a BIPOC hard-hit area. There's funding available purely for outdoor educational spaces. There's funding available for natural rewilding. We even got a very tiny grant for $1,000 from a local outdoor group funded by the state to put in a pathway so that people could do signage for some native plantings that we put in. There's a group called the Wild Ones. It's a national group that's got local chapters. They will come to your space for free and design and put in a native garden. There are the water, wherever you are, your water department may have, if you're in a dry area, a Zurich initiative where they'll help fund and give you small grants or give you flats of plants appropriate to your area. For farming or for gardening and garden education, how to get started on that, including funding and how to set it up, I direct you to a website, the jewishfarmschool.org. It doesn't exist anymore. Natty Passow, who worked for Hazone for quite a while and started the Philly region of Hazone and ran it for a while, now works with Dayenu, the National Legislative Jewish Climate Group. He put together on behalf of Jewish farm and garden organizations a vast website, a database of like 8 organizations, how to set up a community garden, how to find resources, how to integrate it into your curriculum, both for kids, women's moon gardens, calendar gardens, ritual gardens, and especially tons and tons of material for preschools. So jewishfarmschool.org, download it's called the seed packet, download that. It's got pretty much everything you'd need.
Thank you, Sue. I would also add the National Wildlife Federation has Sacred Grounds program. Tap into that. You can probably do that locally as well. And likewise, Green America, which is a secular environmental organization, has victory gardens and other related programming that might be useful to you no matter where you are in the United States. So those are 2 other resources. And then of course, Sue was generous and you now have her email address. Feel free to reach out to Sue. We've been talking about these resources, a lot of them. I'm sure everyone's list is getting longer and longer as the minutes go by. And Sarah, you threw out a bunch of organizations and names earlier and raised our awareness about all these different programs and funding that's available. We don't have access to you 24/7. Are there some like big buckets of organizations or names of types of organizations we should be thinking about that no matter where we are, we could just type that into our search box and come up with the right answer and can help us figure something out? What do you recommend?
Oh, Karen, I wish there was. The closest thing to what you're describing is the Desire database. Again, it's fantastic. Yeah, Rebecca, go you. It's the closest thing we have to kind of like a catch-all for all these kinds of programs. But it's hard, especially around issues like building electrification, decarbonization, converting from fossil fuel heat to electric heat. This is so new, especially in the colder climates, that there's a great need for more resources. So unfortunately, like I said, you realize in this industry that we're a much more federalist country than you might realize. I think we tend to look a lot at what's going on at the federal level. It draws our attention. We're really concerned about the president and stuff. But where the rubber hits the road on a lot of this stuff is at the state level and the local level. And so there's vast differences between how different states run it. And, like I said, there are other CUBs in other states, but not all of them have the capacity to directly interact with consumers. A lot of the CUBs, like the one in Wisconsin, for example, it's like an economist and a couple of lawyers. So they're all different. And again, I am a perpetrator of this. This is also an industry that's just riddled with confusing terminology and acronyms. Oy, with the acronyms. I'm going to throw another one at you all. There are regional energy efficiency organizations, or REOs. Regional energy efficiency organizations are kind of an industry and policy advocacy group around energy efficiency. And so if you're looking for contractors or somebody to point you towards where you might be able to find contractors in your individual state, that might be a place to go. The Midwestern one is called MIA, the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance, but there's like a Southeastern one, there's a Northwestern one. They cover the whole country. But yeah, Karen, that's part of the challenge. This is an area where it's kind of scattered, and that's why a lot of my job as deputy director at CUB is to try to rustle up funding so that we can make sure that we are staffed up so we can just help individuals who have these kinds of questions, because that's nothing can really replace that. You put together a database and before you know it, it's out of date. You need to maintain that kind of thing. I know the Midwest Energy Efficiency Alliance used to maintain a database of energy efficiency contractors that is now defunct. So things come, things go, and we really need to find a person who could help you with this stuff. And I will go ahead and put my contact information. Like I said, even if you're not in Illinois, reach out. I'll do my best to get back to you in a timely fashion, and I will see if I might know. I've been doing this for so long, I might know an organization in your state by luck. So a lot of times it's just kind of who you know and asking around.
And then Desire also, we have a specific page. I included the link to the page in the document for all of our resources. So we have like a really, really long list of, federal and state and even international organizations that you can go to find out more information. It's a lot.
This is almost job security for some of you because you are the ones who know who everyone is. So we need you. It's just so incredibly wonderful. I want to shift a little bit, and this is the context. A lot of us are trying to figure out how to work within our organizations to get change, to reduce our carbon footprint, to find other ways in which we can protect our environment. And we're doing it by using our money and by changing things within the building itself, the building envelope, the landscape, programming that happens within that building. We also have youth, as we've talked about earlier here, who are really concerned about what's happening to this planet. And they don't have access to some of the things that we have access to with respect to being able to implement change within a building structure. Instead, they're turning to the streets and doing a wonderful job doing that and turning to ways in which they can advocate for better policies. Hazon has the Jewish Youth Climate Movement. There are other organizations throughout the world that are just doing this with respect to youth. A question that came up through Facebook Live was actually people being disengaged from organized religion because they don't feel like they have a voice there to raise their concerns or to feel like what they want to have happen can happen in that building. What are thoughts that any of you have with respect to how we can intersect faith and activism and operationalizing, like those three things in a way that feels genuine? And Sue, perhaps you can give examples of things that have happened in Colorado that speak to that three-way intersection in a very beautiful way, where we have adults, so to speak, working with youth, making change happen not only at the legislative level and policy level, but also at the rubber hits the road, the operational level, that making change at a building.
I'll share two stories with you. One from Detroit. There was a very traditional boomer. I'm a boomer board that didn't think environmental issues for the congregation were going to be worth the additional staff brain trust time. It's not even the cash issue, although cash is true too. The executive director, this is true at so many of the synagogues we work with. There are the staffing issues, especially since climate, have really crunched down and really overburdened the staff in the Jewish professional world, as in so many areas. So if it's not a mission critical issue, the organization might just say, we don't have time for this, or we can't ask the facilities person to take the compost from here to there. That's one more thing, and they'll quit. So regarding youth, we had a youth climate group to work on environmental issues. We took them out all the time. We had them canoe down a river. We took them to the incinerator. We did a ton of, they helped develop their curriculum. It was an 8-week program. And they came up with requests. As part of this work they began to do investigative work at the organization. What exactly are we serving at our bar mitzvahs and weddings and onegs? Well, how exactly are we buying whatever we're buying here? What is it we're buying? And they wrote it up and they said, doesn't work for us. We have to walk our talk. You people have to make room for this work. And they wrote it up and they went to a board meeting, and their voices shamed the elders so much that change happened like this. So I think that youth engagement is, this is an issue that all kids know about. I'll share that at Ecar, for the JCC in Denver, we run a summer camp, farm-based, earth-based summer camp that just connects kids to nature and the food system. And the 8-year-olds, were really friendly and happy until we said, what are you worried about the environment? And the 8-year-olds know what's happening, and they're distressed and they're bummed out. So I think it's incumbent on us to provide ways to engage kids outside. The overall, we just have to provide spaces and staff time. to support groups of kids taking action. Repair the World is a great organization as well. And in Detroit, as in other cities, they have a bar mitzvah program where 16-year-olds will mentor 13-year-olds, and they'll work on local social justice issues. The 16-year-olds in the program are volunteering at organizations, and the 13-year-olds are coming to programs about those issues. So there are programs. Avodah runs an incredible youth-based justice training program and fellowship. There's many of these programs. If we each in our institutions can amplify these programs and get people to sign up, there's also a tremendous amount of space for young adult professionals. Here in Colorado, we notice it's the Shemitah year. It's the sabbatical, every 7-year sabbatical year, where the land's supposed to rest and we're supposed to relieve debts, and a whole slew of a really integrated social equity proposition for how we set up our society. We put out a call to say we'd like to offer a space for education during the Shemitah year and engagement in local social justice issues, most of which are around climate, are attached in some way or another to climate. We have 28 people in this. We didn't know if anyone would sign up for it, but 28 35 and under people signed up to participate 3 times a month to build connections to BIPOC organizations in town and take on solidarity work with them. And half of that group are young Jewish professionals. So what we know about our area, we haven't said this acronym yet today, but the area that we're working in is called JOFFE, Jewish Outdoor Food Farming and Environmental Education. And the research that's been done over the last 15 years on how this kind of programming impacts people and this kind of earth-based engagement with disenfranchised folks is just stunning. People say that these are, I don't have to go into a synagogue that I'm not going to go into that doesn't speak to me. I can do my Jewish engagement on the earth. I can be around a fire. I can be growing and distributing food. I can be hiking and do my Jewish outdoors, as so many of our Hasidic masters did in a different generation. It's just, we know this stuff works. We just have to make these programs and opportunities, and we have to staff them and make them available to people.
Such a rich response. Lorna, you were going to add to that. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, this is something that's very, very close to my own heart in terms of like the intergenerational dimensions of this. I mean, I'd go even further, like to say that how the faiths respond to the prospect of extinction, ecological crisis, it really is the litmus test on whether the religion, faith is relevant from the perspective of the next generation, and for many people of other generations as well. If our faiths cannot speak into this moment with a message of hope, a message of relevance, a message of transformation, and meaningful action to accompany that, what are we about? Really, what are faith communities about? So I think that this is really a moment. Pope Francis, in his amazing, I love this book, Let Us Dream. It was written during the COVID crisis, and he talks about how crisis changes us, whether we like it or not. We're changed by a crisis. How we respond to it is what can direct the future. A crisis can become a kairos. A kairos is the opportune moment to step into a new reality. Arundhati Roy, the writer, said something quite similar during the pandemic. We're in a paradigm shift because of this COVID crisis, because of the climate, the ecological crisis. We have a moment of choice on what we carry forward. And I think that a lot is being asked really of faith communities in terms of how we respond in a deep way, beyond what we know. And to me, that's what, when we talk about youth, like that authenticity, that idealism that's matched by realism is what Like, we won't be worrying about youth engagement if faith communities are authentic. I mean, that's really putting it out there. That's being a little bit bold, but we are in the big bold festival. If we're authentic, um, younger generations will see what's relevant. And I think I mean, I could talk forever about the kind of the Laudato Si movement, which has kind of arisen from Laudato Si was Pope Francis' letter on the environment in 2015. And I'm also serve as the president of the Laudato Si movement. And in a church that often is, in many parts of the world, seen as struggling, aging, certainly in Western Europe, the energy that this message of integral ecology, environmental action has brought has re-energized communities. It is challenging. It can be challenging when you're, as I was, standing with all the teenagers outside Leinster House, our Parliament, every Friday for over a year. Like, it's kind of like, well, what are you older people doing here, and why don't you like so the youth love to lead. They want the older people to be involved, but there's that tussle of it's uncomfortable, but it should be. I think it should be uncomfortable. But yeah, I think it's the biggest single challenge to our faith communities right now.
We know from Pew Research studies that come out every once in a while, indeed, that there are fewer and fewer people who are directly connected to any religious organization. They might feel it, or it might be part of how they have grown up, but whether or not they're officially connected to a religious organization right now is a challenge. And yet, as Lorna, you just alluded to, it's an opportunity for us to reconnect. It's an opportunity for Jewish organizations to make that connection between earth care and healing the earth, something we're all witnessing about us every single day, every time we turn on the radio, look at a newspaper, turn on the television, and our religious values, what tradition has taught us. And that's what Hazon and so many other Jewish organizations are all about, is making that connection, making what you are doing and care about in your secular world and elevating it, making it more important because of that underlying value system that comes with so many religions, all religions actually. That's what we do through the Seal of Sustainability. If you talk about the toolkits that are available for our program, or the people who are involved with the program, there are toolkits that can help someone understand how to compost, how to do a native garden, what to do about environmental restoration. We're talking about healing, and National Wildlife Foundation has their sacred grounds. We know that studies have shown that people who get outdoors, who get proximate, are more connected to what they want to care about. Jaffe, what Sue alluded to earlier, is again another example of that outdoor education framed Jewishly and what that does to make people more engaged, to make them want to do things. These are resources we all have, right? We all have the outdoors. Even if you're in a city, there's a park you can go to, there's a river you can go to. There's all places where we can find those engagements and find those resources to leverage within our community. And I really appreciate all of you sharing the way you have done. I'm going to turn it around. Are there things you want to continue to share out that you don't feel you've been able to address yet? Whether it has to do with youth engagement, whether it has to do with particular resources we should all be thinking about, whether it has to do with the shift in how we frame things and how the pandemic has added to the challenges when it comes to being good environmental stewards sometimes. Anything you want to bring up, my esteemed colleagues here? Sue in the middle, my middle.
I want to say that I want to respond to one of the questions in the Q&A with something to talk about. There's a question about food waste. And what I want to say about that is in every institution that you're a part of, you're a leader, or you're called to be a leader at this time. So if you're in B'nai B'rith, if you are on the board of the JCRC, if you're in a synagogue, if your kids go to a school, you have an organization there that you can impact. The way to deal with food waste on an institutional level, and again, plenty of places to go for resources for your own home, but food waste is a purchasing question. You know, it's entirely a purchasing question. It's not about how do we compost and get rid of our food waste. That's one thing to do, but that's already too late. What I'd like to share out is that step into your organizations and create organization level policy change, like Congregation Har Hashem did in Boulder. They created a environmental earth charter that all of their policy has to now flow through. It's sort of an example of San Francisco's old, oh gosh, now I'm going to forget what it's called. It's the policy that does no harm, so that you have to, all of your purchasing and expenses have to look through an environmental lens. But the only way an institution is going to be able to change, and that change is going to be able to persist, is if it's because due to COVID, we've had so many staff turnovers. You know, you can be an enthusiastic layperson at your organization, or you can have a totally committed staff person, but on average, within 3 years, those people are going to move on. But if the charter of your organization, or if your operating protocol, if your employee handbooks say this is what we must do, then at least you have a chance. At least the executive director or the program person or the facilities person can't say, no, I'm not going to do that. If it's who you are as an organization and you make that policy change. So food waste would be, we commit to buying food, only the food we need that's not going to be overpackaged. So there are, it ends up being a simple purchase decision. Making it into an institutional policy is a little more complicated, but offers so many opportunities for education and engagement.
Thank you, Sue. Anyone else?
One thing I want to bring it up, because I think this is a very good way to both get your community involved in making action and also ending up with individual results, is something called solarized or thermalized programs. So these are essentially community-run Groupon programs to buy and install solar panels or renewable thermal technologies like heat pumps. So I included links to how to create a campaign in the documents. So essentially, you know, a community, a group of volunteers come together, and, you know, with the added benefit of having an already pre-established group of a religious organization, it can be very, very easy for people to get involved and help people in the community and in the neighborhood, or just in the city in general, move towards cleaner energy. Because all you have to do is you get together, you find a solar installer, and as we've already provided, we have databases of solar installers. You have an agreement with them, and then you go out into the community and get people to, you know, buy solar panels. And it's a super great way. It's not a legal program, by which I mean, not that it's illegal, but that you don't need specific state policies in order to do this. So it's a really great way to, no matter where you live, in order to get something done. And because they have the campaign toolkits, and you can also look to see if there were campaigns in your city or in your state, because those people will be happy to help you get your campaign off the ground.
In other words, you're not teaching us to do something illegally. It's just crowdsourcing.
No, yeah, sorry. Yeah, that's not what I meant. No, it's 100% legal. It's just, there's no policies. Right. Legally, there's no policies promoting it, but there's also no policies like making it illegal. So gotcha. You're just on your own.
Thank you, Rebecca. Another nugget of knowledge for all of us. Our time is drawing to close. I actually am so incredibly surprised and about how quickly and how wonderfully time went by as we all shared opportunities and learnings and resources. What a rich, informative session. Some learnings. Think outside the box when it comes to resources. Think about people resources. Think about mobilizing and motivating people, buildings and the other assets we own, our religion as a resource, elected officials and their networks, a slew of associations, a bunch of databases, as Sue referred to, full spectrum networking as a resources, renewable energy organizations and that are in different parts of the country and how that's a resource. Something else we didn't really explore or talk about, or at least I don't hear anyone name it, were IPLs, Interfaith Power and Lights. There are a number of chapters throughout the United States, and they can help you with a lot of energy efficiency initiatives that you're doing all as well. A lot of links, all going to be in a document for you that will be posted not only here, but also later on with distribution, along with all of the recordings for all of the different panel sessions happening throughout this whole week. I want to thank my panelists. You're a wonderful team, and I look forward to other opportunities to collaborate with you, to reach out to you, to get information, to share information. We are a team when it comes to trying to figure out ways to change this world and make it a healthier planet for everyone. If you'll recall, for those who did step back, who did participate in our SEAL Summit, the Hazone SEAL Summit last October, we had a video that was shown to us about a lone man standing on a hill doing his own dance to his own music. And then you saw a little while later, someone else jumped in, and then someone else jumped in, and pretty soon the whole hill was dancing. That's what this session and so many other sessions this week are designed to do. We want you to help dance, to be part of that dance crowd, because if the bigger the mosh pit, the more apt we are to have real meaningful change in our communities, positive change, helping our earth heal, helping our communities heal, helping all people heal, and really making this a just, healthier world for everyone. It's Tikkun Olam, it's repairing the world. I appreciate all of you being here right now. Stay tuned throughout the afternoon and the rest of the week. There are a lot of community organizations doing programming. And then tonight, there's a session, a main stage session on fossil fuel industry. Stay tuned for that, register for that, tap into that. It's called Fossil Freedom. My email is available to you as well. Please feel free to reach out to me to talk about institutional greening initiatives at Hazone and at Pearlstone. My email address is karen.lewis@hazone.org. Thank you so much for all of your time today, and I look forward to hearing from you in the future. Take care.